Welcome back to the Hairenik Newscast. This week we'll be covering the biggest stories impacting Armenians around the world. Let's start in Washington. Presidential candidates Trump and Harris have been saying the right things to Armenians on the eve of the election. Aram Hamparian, who leads the Armenian National Committee of America, says his team is seeking to put those words to work. Let's go to Aram. Welcome, Aram Hamparian, to the show. Aram, former president and current Republican candidate Donald Trump in recent days accused his rival Kamala Harris of doing, quote, nothing as 120,000 Armenian Christians were horrifically persecuted and displaced in Artsakh, end quote. He went on to say that if elected, he would work to, quote, stop the violence and ethnic cleansing and restore peace, all caps, between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Now, this is obviously a very public outreach, but I'd like to ask you, given your vantage point as the head of the ANCA in Washington, D.C., what's going on behind the scenes when it comes to outreach from the Trump campaign to the Armenian-American community and with advocacy groups like yours?
Sure. What we're seeing is a democracy working the way it should work. Candidates seeking to earn the support of votes, especially critical votes in swing states like Pennsylvania and Michigan, Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, Nevada. This is a healthy thing. The candidates, both Harris and Trump, seeking to earn our support, win our votes in these swing states. That's a good thing. Now, we've been through this before. We know very well the dynamics of campaign promises and how they very often, almost always, do not translate into actual concrete policy once these politicians are in office. But they do help frame the debate. They do help sort of create the guidelines or the guideposts within which policy is discussed over the next 4 or 8 years. So that's a healthy thing. We want the candidates to speak out on our issue. We want them to seek our votes. We'll decide among ourselves how seriously we need to take one of them or both of them. And I think there's a lot of skepticism given the past. But ultimately, it's a net positive to see the candidates so aggressively seeking our votes. And this is, I think, mostly because of our work. I mean, it's been a year's worth of work on the part of the ANCA, but it's also a function of this election being so very close. It may come down to just 2 or 3 states, and those, as it turns out, are states with quite a few Armenians in them. And the Armenians in those states are highly focused, highly attentive, highly driven by the sense that the politicians who armed Azerbaijan, who enabled genocide, who abandoned Artsakh, need to be held accountable.
Understood. So what concrete actions would you like to see in the run-up to the election that would give weight to these words?
Now, Alison, it's a great question. If we've learned anything, it's that the promise of deferred action is almost always hollow. The idea that if elected, I will do A, B, and C. It never takes place. It's a shell game that the politicians have played with us for decades. So what we want are things delivered on the table before Election Day. So, for example, President Trump can call upon his Republican colleague, Speaker Johnson of the House, and say, let's get a vote on the resolution HR 7288, which would enforce the restriction, the 907 restriction on aid to Azerbaijan. He could do that. Vice President Vance is a sitting member of the Senate. He could co-sponsor and work for passage of SRES 540, which would scrutinize Azerbaijan's human rights abuses with U.S. military aid. On the Democratic side, Vice President Harris could announce a formal enforcement of Section 907. She could ramp up the assistance to Artsakh refugees, which has really been shamefully paltry so far. And of course, she can push for the release of Armenian hostages, setting that as a condition for American participation in the upcoming COP29 climate conference in Baku.
Understood. And what is your level of interaction with the Harris campaign? How are the Democrats working to win over Armenian-American voters?
I mean, we're in touch with both campaigns. We're in touch with elected leaders of both parties. But the way we communicate, I would say, there's a formal dialogue and there's an etiquette and a protocol to that. But the way you really communicate with these politicians is by demonstrating to them that you represent many voters and that crossing the Armenian community, in this case, arming a genocide against Artsakh, comes with consequences. If you demonstrate that, they will find ways to to meet our standard, as opposed to many groups who simply lower their own standards to endorse the candidate that they prefer based on American partisan considerations. We view it exactly the opposite way, which is we're going to use our leverage and frankly, a bare-knuckled fashion to say these guys need to be held accountable. We're rather unforgiving when it comes to genocide, and we should be, right? And our message to the politicians is you meet the test of holding Azerbaijan accountable, deterring renewed Azerbaijani aggression, creating a pathway for the Armenians of Artsakh to return home. You deliver those things before Election Day, and if you do that, you'll win hearts and minds in the Armenian world. If you're just making promises on top of a record that is really genocide aligned, then don't expect certainly any formal support from the ANCA and expect very little support among the grassroots of the Armenian community.
So we're very close to Election Day. Is the ANCA planning to endorse a candidate, and what would it take to get your endorsement? I'm talking about, of course, the presidential ticket. Sure.
No, we have not endorsed, and it's been pretty clear for many months now that the records don't merit an endorsement. Right? Both, as I said, armed Azerbaijan, enabled genocide, abandoned Artsakh. They both bear the burden, the guilt of that genocide-aligned policy. Add to that neither has in any way renounced or reversed those policies. Certainly, the incumbent ticket has not done so. President Trump has not done so, at least at the level of campaign statements. They've not walked back what they did, and then on top of that, they've said the right words, and we were happy to see Vice President Harris speak about the return of Armenians to Artsakh. That's a good thing. That's now part of the discourse in Washington, because the leader of the Democratic Party has said that the return of Armenians to Artsakh is now part of her party's agenda. The fact that Trump criticized Azerbaijan's ethnic cleansing of Artsakh, and he used the word Artsakh, that's a good thing. If Armenians, obviously we wear many hats as Armenians in America, some of those hats are partisan hats, but if we were to take off our partisan hat, or Democrat or Republican hat, and look at just the core fact that the top two candidates for the top office in the nation are now speaking in very favorable ways about Artsakh, that's a good thing. We are far ahead of the game today because of those statements than we would be had they not chosen to speak on that issue. So I think that's really, as I said, a tribute to a lot of work on our part, a lot of work with the ANC of Michigan, the ANC of Pennsylvania, the ANC of Nevada, a lot of work, plus the fact this is a tight election where it might be that the margin of victory, Allison, in any given swing state is smaller than the number of Armenians in that state. So, we're well positioned here.
Of course, your legislative priorities will continue long past Election Day, but back to the endorsement question, I just wonder if one of the parties were to, as you're pressing for, actually help further legislation that the ANCA has been working on before Election Day, would you consider giving an endorsement?
Anything's possible, Allison, but let me say that with every passing day, the bar gets higher, and that's precisely because the Congress is currently out of session, and the ability of let's say President Trump to talk to Speaker Johnson, all he could get from Speaker Johnson is a commitment to act on this after the election during the lame duck session, and that's a promise, and we know all about promises. There is more time for Vice President Harris to take action because she can, on behalf of her administration, obviously in consultation with the president, take the steps I discussed, which is boycott the COP conference unless the House is released, dramatically increase the assistance to Artsakh refugees in Armenia, and then announce that there's not going to be another dime, that it is the official policy of the Biden-Harris administration not to spend another dime, to send another nickel to genocidal Azerbaijan as long as they occupy Armenian territory, as long as they do not allow the return of Armenians to Artsakh, as long as they don't secure the release of every last Armenian hostage.
Thank you so much for your time, Aram, and I'm sure you'll be keeping on the pressure on these candidates. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Allison.
That's The View from Washington. Let's go a bit deeper and check in on our community in the swing state of Michigan. Zovinar Hamakorzian is the chairwoman of the Armenian National Committee there, and she also sits on the national board. Zovinar, welcome to the Hairenik Newscast.
Thank you for having me.
Zovinar, why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about the Michigan Armenian community? How many people are we talking about? Michigan is, of course, a swing state, but what is the role of the Armenian-American vote in that state?
We have about 72,000 Armenians in Michigan based on our database, ANCA database. They mostly reside in the Metro Detroit area, but I have to say that we have Armenians in all 13 districts. We have 4 churches, an Armenian charter school, and many organizations. The Armenians here contribute in every way to the communities and the cities they live in, and they have been here for a very long time.
And what are the issues most important to our Armenian Americans in Michigan, and what sorts of legislative and other priorities has ANC Michigan been pressing for, even aside from the presidential campaign context?
Yeah, so as every Armenian in the U.S., our priority, the ANCA's priority and ANC of Michigan's priority is the security of Armenia, the Artsakh issue, the return of Armenians to Artsakh, holding Azerbaijan accountable, stopping military aid to Azerbaijan. We have many families here in Michigan who have relatives and unfortunately who have lost also relatives in Artsakh, and they are very much affected by everything that's happening in Armenia and Artsakh. So those are issues at the very forefront of all of our families in Michigan, and that is going to play a major role in the upcoming election.
Indeed, and it wasn't so long ago that the community was actually, encouraging Armenian Americans to vote uncommitted in the primaries, mainly to pressure the incumbent administration on its foreign policy towards Armenia and on the Artsakh issue. The Democratic ticket has obviously changed since the primaries. But how has the ANC kind of recalibrated since then? What is the Michigan ANC's position with just over a week to go before voting day?
As Armenian Americans, we know too well that candidates make empty promises all the time. We think in Michigan that it is not too late for both candidates to take action to support their statements. So we are waiting for that action, the next step in Michigan, and our community, many of them are still undecided, and a week away from the election, it's going to be very last minute for many of them.
Understood. Well, Zovinar, we'll be staying in touch, and we look forward to keeping an eye on this story.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. While the U.S. presidential election dominates the discourse in the United States, many Armenians these days have our Middle Eastern communities on their minds, particularly Lebanon, where the war between Israel and Hezbollah, part of a larger regional showdown with Iran, shows no signs of abating. Let's go to Vera Yakubian, the executive director of the ANC Middle East, to hear about the state of affairs for Armenian institutions and youth in Lebanon, and how we in the diaspora can help. Vera, welcome to Hairenik's Newscast. Thank you so much for joining us, given all that's happening in Lebanon. Please, for our audience in the United States and around the world, what is happening with our community on the ground, in the areas where our community lives? Are they in danger? Are there areas targets for attacks?
Thank you, Alison, for having me today. Actually, while the Armenian community in Lebanon faces indirect challenges due to the conflict that is going on today, their concentrated areas have been specific has not been actually specific targets in the recent hostilities between Israel and Hezbollah. Armenians in Lebanon, to make it clear, predominantly reside in areas such as Buchamut, a suburb of Beirut, Mount Lebanon, and the Bekaa Valley, such as Anjar. This neighborhood has historically been a haven for diverse community. I'm talking about Buchamut, including Armenians. While some of these areas have experienced disturbances due to their proximity to targeted sites, they have not been the primary focus of recent attacks. However, many Armenians remain striving today to preserve their cultural heritage and community structures in the middle of this unfortunate crisis.
Understood. How, if at all, is the current hostilities different than previous wars our community in Lebanon has endured?
Well, the current Israel-Hezbollah conflict poses unique challenges for Lebanon's Armenian community today, which has endured past conflicts, but now really faces new and compounding factors. For example, the conflict is part of a complex, as we all know, regional landscape involving Israel, Gaza, and tensions with Iran, which limits Lebanon's control over security and raises the risk of escalation beyond previous localized conflicts. Hezbollah's strengthened position with Iranian support, of course, add to the unpredictability of the situation, making it harder really to anticipate and control the situation. Lebanon's severe economic crisis with hyperinflation and widespread poverty makes it difficult for communities, including the Armenian community, to maintain stability and, or let's say, to relocate if necessary. Unlike past conflicts, the Lebanese government today is weakened, very weak. Public services are out of function, they're not functioning, and communities depend more on external organizations for support with little coordination aid. Another factor is the immigration has significantly impacted the Armenian population, reducing, of course, community cohesion and making it harder to sustain support network. Another thing is the refuge options for Armenians are more limited than in the past, as international migration policies, especially nowadays, are tightened, and Armenia itself is facing its own challenges. The Armenian diaspora, though still supportive, is stretched or is more tight today because the resources are divided among diaspora resources. Are divided among Lebanese Armenians, Armenia, and previously Nagorno-Karabakh. So another challenge is that the young generation who is facing today this war is fatigued and is facing economic hardship and insecurity. This cycle not only threatens physical security, but also diminishes cultural and community continuity especially when we see that the younger generation is leaving Lebanon, is leaving the country, making it increasingly difficult for Armenians in Lebanon to preserve their language, religion, and traditions in the middle of continuous resource shortages and immigration, let's say, pressures.
How has the war impacted the Armenian institutions, schools, clinic? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, You see, the current conflict, as I said, severely impacted the Lebanese Armenian institutions like schools, very normally, healthcare centers, community centers, creating actually serious challenges for day-to-day life. These institutions have historically, as you know, been the pillars of resilience, providing education, healthcare, and cultural, let's say, services. But recent tensions have strained their operations. For example, Armenian schools often close during intensified conflict to ensure safety, and when they do operate, they may have shortened, let's say, hours or limited capacity. This actually influences the academic progress of students. Remote learning has been attempted, but Lebanon's unreliable internet and the frequent power outages hinder this effort. So the ongoing economic crisis has also led to departure of skilled teachers, further straining the schools that face funding due to the currency, or funding shortages due to the currency devaluation and rising operational costs. So many parents struggle to pay tuition fees, leading to tight budgets for schools that rely on these fees and at the same time rely on donations. At the same time, Armenian healthcare centers also face significant challenges, including medicine and supply shortages in the middle of the Lebanon's economic, of course, crisis or collapse. With government healthcare services weakening, there is no reliance or greater reliance on, there is no reliance on government, let's say, healthcare services, but there is a greater reliance on community clinics, which are also overstretched. Economic challenges have reduced funds for cultural events, many parents finding it difficult to support their children's, for example, participation in extracurricular activities such as dance and music, the prices of goods increasing, families struggling to afford essentials like food, fuel, and school supplies. So all this is impacting the Armenian community's day-to-day life. And we're not talking, of course, about the disadvantaged neighborhoods like Burchamud, where residents really rely on community support networks that are themselves not in a good shape. If the conflict escalates, the Armenian neighborhoods like Burchamud in Beirut may face increased risks of stray attacks, or might become caught in the ceasefire, in the crossfire. This could disrupt essential services such as schools, healthcare centers, community centers, limiting access to vital resources for the Armenian community. So if the conflict is prolonged, it may also lead to forced displacement as residents, including Armenians, I'm saying if the conflict is prolonged, might seek safer areas or move abroad. This will destabilize the community cohesion and reducing access to cultural, educational, and religious institutions, as you know. The conflict is multi-layered, and the conflict adds to what these layers, also the layers of trauma to a community already burdened by successive crises, potentially intensifying, why not, mental health challenges, especially among younger generations who have never experienced such war or such conflicts.
Understood. And putting this in the bigger picture, as you mentioned, how complex this is, how have these hostilities impacted the ANC Middle East's office, the ability to pursue high-tide activities? Perhaps you can speak to that.
Yeah, the Armenian National Committee of the Middle East which advocates for the Armenian cause, including genocide recognition, support for Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh, and protection for regional Armenian interests, because of this conflict, faces significant challenges, as I said, due to the current Israel-Hezbollah conflict in Lebanon. The tense security situation, of course, restricts ANC members' movement. It limits their ability to engage with policymakers, with academicians, and of course, the wider public. The conflict has also diverted media and public attention. This is very normal, away from Armenian issues, reducing the visibility of ANC's advocacy efforts and hampering public support for the ANC or Haitat objectives. The conflict actually has intensified financial strain on the ANC as resources now support immediate needs of Armenians in Lebanon, leaving less for broader advocacy. So the economic and security challenges also mean many Armenians are leaving Lebanon, shrinking the local support base necessary for the sustained Haitat activities or initiatives. These circumstances weaken actually the ANC's capacity to pursue long-term goals like genocide recognition and advocacy for Nagorno-Karabakh.
And how could Armenians outside Lebanon support our community and their resilience?
Well, the Armenian diaspora can play a crucial role, as it has always done, of course, in supporting the Armenian community in Lebanon during these challenging times. We can mention, for example, donations to Armenian schools who really are in need of financial support, healthcare centers, community centers, to ensure that these institutions can continue providing essential services for the Lebanese Armenians. Of course, and we know that Armenian advocacy groups in the diaspora, like Armenians in the United States, can work to draw attention, international attention to the situation in Lebanon, emphasizing the need for peace and stability to protect Armenian communities and other vulnerable groups. These can include lobbying governments and international organizations to advocate for a ceasefire and support humanitarian efforts.
Thank you so much, Vera, for your time and that update, and let's stay in touch, please.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Alison.
Now, let's go to our correspondent in Yerevan to hear about the latest political developments in the homeland. Nare, we've just learned that the mayor of Gyumri, Armenia's second largest city, and his ruling bloc have resigned from their posts on the city council. This comes against the backdrop of arrests and potential charges. Can you tell us briefly, what do we know so far? And how does this fit into the scheme of things that we've been seeing on the ground in Armenia when it comes to local governance these past few years?
We saw reports coming about how we expect civil contract to try to seize control of Gyumri municipality, where their positions were not so strong. And then after a number of threats, accusations, and blackmails, we saw arrests. And clearly, they have this pressure on the opposition bloc has succeeded, because today the mayor of Gyumri resigned, and we should expect snap elections with civil contract candidate being the one expected to win.
Can you talk a little bit about where this, what is the state of local governance in Armenia? We hear outside Armenia a lot about, that, okay, we lost Artsakh, but we have democracy in Armenia. What we're hearing from Gyumri is obviously concerning, but I believe it fits a pattern. Could you walk us back about what's been going on with power in different municipalities in Armenia, especially these past few years since the 2021 snap elections in Armenia?
Since 2021 elections, it has become clear that no matter which particular opposition bloc or party you are a part of, winning might be dangerous for you because the cases will be initiated against you. There will be threats, there will be blackmails, there will be use of police force with blocking journalists and lawyers, so nobody even knows what is going on in those rooms. And we've seen this happen everywhere, from Syunik to Lori. We've seen this in 2021 in Vartanis. The mayor of Vanadzor was arrested for quite a few years. We saw this in Alaverdi and even in the small village of Akhuryan, where you would think that this is not so important. Still, Civil Contract did everything they could to consolidate power there.
Understood. Certainly a story and a pattern to keep track of as we approach potential national elections. Now let's pivot to Georgia, Armenia's neighbor, which had elections over the weekend. The ruling Georgian Dream Party has secured victory. While the Georgian opposition, including the president, are contesting the results, Armenia's Prime Minister Pashinyan has already congratulated the ruling party on its victory. What can Armenia expect from these results?
Armenia should expect Georgian Dream to move in the direction of normalizing relations with Russia, which means that our connection with our biggest economic investor will not be hindered. And Georgian border, as we know, is our longest open border. So we believe that Georgian Dream will keep the lines of communication with Russia open and to the Black Sea. And we also expect that Georgian Dream will not be opening like a second front against Russia. There will not be sanctions against Russia. So we expect our northern part to be stable and calm.
Understood. As we know, the president has called for protests, so we'll keep an eye on that to see if that develops, but it certainly seems as if the vote was decisive. Thank you so much, Nare, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you, Alison.
One last piece of news. The European Parliament has passed a resolution stating that it considers Azerbaijan's ongoing human rights abuses incompatible with its hosting of COP29, the UN's flagship climate summit, coming up early next month. They are urging EU leaders, in particular Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, to use COP29 as an opportunity to remind Azerbaijan of its international obligations. Thank you all for joining this week's episode of the Hairenik Newscast, and be sure to follow us on YouTube at Hairenik, as well as on Facebook, Instagram, and X. We'll see you next week.